always ruin elegant nights." The words cut through the ballroom just 1 second before the slap echoed beneath the crystal chandeliers of the Beaumont Grand Hotel. Every conversation stopped. Forks froze halfway to designer plates. A violinist near the stage lowered his bow mid-note as more than 400 guests turned toward the center of the gala floor. Dr. Alana Reed stood perfectly still beside the champagne tower, one hand resting lightly against her cheek, her dark emerald gown catching the gold lights spilling from the ceiling above. Across from her, Evelyn Beaumont stared with cold fury, her diamond bracelet trembling slightly against her wrist. "I asked for sparkling water," Evelyn said sharply, loud enough for the entire room to hear. "Not attitude." A few nervous laughs scattered through the crowd, thin and uncomfortable. Alana blinked once, slowly. Her breathing remained calm even as the side of her face burned beneath the ballroom lights. She looked nothing like a woman who had just been humiliated in front of Manhattan's wealthiest families. She looked composed, controlled, dangerous in the quietest possible way. Around them, phones began rising discreetly above tuxedos and evening gowns. Someone whispered, "Who is she?" Another voice answered softly, "I think she's staff." Evelyn straightened the silk collar of her white designer jacket and reached for a champagne glass from a passing server, dismissing Alana with the casual cruelty of someone used to never being questioned. "Security can remove her now," she said. But before anyone moved, a deep voice interrupted from across the ballroom. "Evelyn." Charles Beaumont stood near the main investor table, silver-haired and rigid, confusion tightening across his face as he stared directly at Alana. The massive digital screen behind him glowed with the words Beaumont Capital Global Merger Summit, Final Signing Ceremony. $1 billion. 32 international investors. Months of negotiations. And suddenly, the air inside the ballroom no longer felt elegant. It felt unstable. Alana lowered her hand from her cheek. "Actually," she said softly, her voice carrying farther than it should have in the silence, "you may want to postpone tonight's signing." Evelyn let out a sharp laugh. "Excuse me." Alana's eyes shifted calmly toward the enormous LED screen hanging above the ballroom stage. Numbers moved across it in elegant blue graphics beside projected growth forecasts and market projections. To everyone else, it looked flawless. But Alana noticed the flicker immediately. A delay of less than half a second. Barely visible. Barely humanly noticeable. Except to someone like her. Her stomach tightened. Not fear. Recognition. "Your merger servers are compromised," she said quietly. "Time." Nobody laughed. Charles Beaumont's expression darkened. "What are you talking about?" Alana stepped toward the screen slowly, the soft fabric of her dress brushing against the marble floor. "Someone is inside your network right now," she continued. "If you finalize the transaction tonight, every investor account connected to Beaumont Capital could be exposed within the hour." A wave of murmurs spread across the ballroom. Lucas Beaumont immediately stood from his chair near the stage, his jaw tightening. Young. Expensive suit. Perfect smile sharpened by entitlement. "That's absurd," he snapped. "And who exactly are you supposed to be?" For the first time since the slap, Alana looked directly at him. Calm eyes. Steady voice. "The CEO your family flew to New York to sign a $1 billion cybersecurity partnership with tonight." Silence crashed over the ballroom so heavily it almost felt physical. Evelyn Beaumont's face drained of color as realization hit her all at once. The woman she had mistaken for staff wasn't staff at all. She was Dr. Alana Reed. The woman every investor in that room had been waiting to meet. No one spoke for nearly 5 full seconds. The only sound inside the ballroom came from the soft hum of the digital screen above the stage and the faint clink of melting ice inside abandoned champagne glasses. Evelyn Beaumont's expression shifted slowly from irritation to disbelief as she stared at Alana Reed like she was seeing her for the first time. Around them, investors exchanged uneasy glances while whispers spread across the marble ballroom faster than smoke. "That is impossible," Lucas Beaumont finally said, forcing out a laugh that sounded thinner now. "Dr. Reed was delayed in Boston. Her jet has not even landed yet." Alana looked at him calmly. "My jet landed 3 hours ago." Charles Beaumont stepped forward, his polished shoes echoing sharply against the marble floor. Up close, he looked older than he had from across the room. The confidence that usually surrounded him like armor had cracked just slightly around the edges. "Dr. Reed," he said carefully, "if this is some kind of misunderstanding, your servers are already being mirrored offshore." Alana interrupted softly. "You have less than 30 minutes before your investor records become public." A chill moved visibly through the room. One of the attorneys near the investor table immediately pulled out his phone. Another rushed toward the technical booth near the stage. Lucas folded his arms tightly. "Convenient timing," he said coldly. "You walk in, create panic, and suddenly you are the only person who can save us." Waiters stood frozen beside silver trays. Wealthy donors and executives whispered behind diamond-covered hands while pretending not to stare. It reminded her of another room years ago. Different city, different clothes. Same feeling. Invisible until suddenly inconvenient. Her mother used to clean office buildings in Baltimore overnight, while Alana sat beneath conference tables finishing homework under fluorescent lights. Some nights the security guards ignored her completely. Other nights they watched her like she did not belong near expensive carpet and polished glass. She still remembered the smell of industrial cleaner on her mother's hands during long bus rides home at 2 in the morning. "Never let bitterness become your identity," her mother used to whisper while rubbing warmth back into tired fingers. "People will try to reduce you to the smallest version of yourself. Do not help them do it." Alana carried those words with her through every scholarship rejection, every boardroom meeting where investors looked past her toward white executives beside her, every article that described her as surprisingly articulate instead of brilliant. And now, standing in the center of the Beaumont Gala with 400 wealthy strangers staring at her after being publicly humiliated, she refused to let anger make her smaller. The ballroom lights flickered once. Brief, barely noticeable, but Alana saw it instantly. Her eyes narrowed toward the giant screen behind the stage where financial projections suddenly glitched for half a second before correcting themselves. There it was again. The timing. The synchronization lag. Someone inside the Beaumont system was moving faster now. "Get your technical director off the ballroom network immediately," she said firmly. Charles Beaumont turned toward his staff. "Do it." Lucas exhaled sharply in frustration. "Father, this is ridiculous. We are letting one dramatic accusation derail a $1 billion signing ceremony." One dramatic accusation? A new voice entered from near the back of the ballroom. Veronica Hale, chief legal counsel for Beaumont Capital, stepped forward holding a tablet tightly against her chest. Her face had gone pale. "Sir," she said carefully to Charles, "we have unauthorized transfers hitting the secondary servers right now." Silence fell again. Heavy. Suffocating. Evelyn Beaumont slowly lowered her champagne glass onto a nearby tray, her hand no longer steady. Lucas grabbed the tablet from Veronica and stared down at the screen. His confident expression disappeared almost instantly. Numbers flashed red across the display beside dozens of account warnings. Offshore routing activity. Encryption bypass attempts. Investor identity files being copied in real time. "No," Lucas whispered under his breath. Alana watched the panic spread through the Beaumont family without satisfaction. Only certainty, because she had seen this before. 7 years earlier, a hospital network collapsed after executives ignored cybersecurity warnings to protect stock prices. 48 hours later, life support systems failed across 3 states. Her younger sister Mia had been inside one of those hospitals waiting for emergency surgery when the system crashed. By the time backup generators restored the network, it was already too late. Alana never forgot the silence of that waiting room. And she never forgot what corporate greed looked like when innocent people paid for it. The ballroom no longer sounded like a celebration. It sounded like fear wrapped in expensive fabric and whispered behind perfect smiles. Investors crowded around glowing phones while Beaumont executives moved rapidly between tables, their polished composure cracking more with every passing second. The massive screen behind the stage flickered again, this time long enough for several red warning windows to appear before disappearing into black. A low murmur rolled through the room like distant thunder. Charles Beaumont loosened his bow tie for the first time all night. His face had lost its color completely. "Shut the ballroom network down," he ordered sharply. "Disconnect every external server now." Staff rushed toward the technical control room near the back hallway, while Lucas Beaumont stared at the tablet in his hands as though refusing to believe what he was seeing. "This cannot be happening," he muttered. We spent $12 million upgrading security this quarter. Alana's expression did not change. Technology does not fail because it is expensive, she said quietly. It fails because people ignore the right warnings from the wrong people. Lucas looked up instantly, hearing the meaning behind her words. The air between them tightened. Across the ballroom, Evelyn Beaumont stood motionless near the champagne tower, the earlier arrogance gone from her posture. She could still feel the eyes of the room drifting toward her in silent judgment. Wealthy socialites who had laughed nervously moments earlier now avoided looking directly at her. Nobody wanted to stand too close to public humiliation once power started shifting direction. Veronica Hale hurried back toward Charles with another update. Sir, encrypted investor files are being rerouted through multiple shell servers overseas, she whispered urgently. If this leaks publicly before midnight, federal regulators will freeze the merger immediately. Charles closed his eyes briefly. $1 billion balanced on the edge of collapse. Alana watched him carefully. Men like Charles Beaumont spent their entire lives believing control could be purchased. Private jets, political favors, elite attorneys. But panic stripped power down to its bones. Underneath all the money, fear looked exactly the same on everyone. The ballroom lights dimmed suddenly before emergency backup systems clicked on with a soft electrical hum. Gasps spread through the room. Somewhere near the stage, a woman dropped her champagne glass and crystal shattered across the marble floor like ice. Lucas spun toward Alana. If you knew this attack was happening, why did you not stop it before tonight? His voice carried frustration now, but beneath it was something else. Desperation. Alana met his gaze evenly. Because your office ignored my company for 6 months. Lucas frowned. What? My team submitted 3 separate vulnerability reports to Beaumont Capital after your expansion into offshore banking, she said calmly. Each one was marked low priority. Veronica's eyes widened slowly. She turned toward Lucas. You told legal those reports were routine maintenance reviews. They were. Lucas snapped defensively. Every tech company exaggerates risks to sell contracts. Alana said nothing for a moment. She simply looked toward the giant ballroom windows where rain streaked down the glass overlooking Manhattan. The city lights blurred beneath the storm outside, soft and distorted like fading memories. My sister died because executives ignored warnings once, she said finally, her voice quieter now. The room near her seemed to still itself instinctively. Even Lucas stopped talking. The hospital network collapsed in Chicago 7 years ago, she continued. Emergency systems failed after a ransomware breach. 43 patients never recovered. Charles Beaumont looked at her carefully. He recognized the story immediately. Every major corporation in America did. It had become a case study in greed disguised as cost efficiency. Alana's fingers tightened slightly around the small silver clutch in her hand. My sister Mia was 19, she said. She waited 9 hours for surgery while administrators argued over system restoration costs. No one interrupted her, not even the investors. People think cyber attacks are numbers on a screen, Alana continued softly. But eventually every number becomes a person. Silence settled heavily over the ballroom again. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled faintly beyond the hotel windows. Then suddenly every screen inside the ballroom went black all at once. The music stopped completely. A collective breath caught across the room, and one line of white text slowly appeared on the giant merger display above the stage. Payment window closed. The words on the screen did not disappear. Payment window closed. White letters glowed against the black display while the ballroom stood frozen beneath the dim emergency lighting. Nobody reached for champagne anymore. Nobody smiled for cameras. The elegant charity gala that had begun with violin music and million-dollar handshakes now felt cold and airless, like the building itself was holding its breath. A second line suddenly appeared beneath the first. Investor data transfer in progress. Gasps rippled across the room. One investor rushed toward the exit while another demanded his assistant call federal regulators immediately. Somewhere near the stage, 2 executives began arguing in hushed but frantic voices. Lucas Beaumont stepped closer to the screen, disbelief written across his face. This is impossible, he muttered. Our servers are isolated. Alana's eyes remained fixed on the display. Not anymore. The giant ballroom windows rattled softly as rain battered Manhattan outside. Blue emergency lights reflected faintly across polished marble floors and crystal centerpieces. For the first time all evening, Charles Beaumont no longer looked like the most powerful man in the room. He looked trapped inside a disaster he could not control. "Can you stop this?" he asked quietly. The question landed heavily because everyone heard it. Investors, lawyers, hotel staff. Even Evelyn Beaumont slowly turned toward Alana after spending the last 20 minutes pretending not to look at her. Alana did not answer right away. Her gaze moved across the ballroom slowly, absorbing the fear spreading through people who usually only inspired fear in others. She noticed trembling hands gripping expensive phones. Men who had mocked smaller companies now whispering desperately to assistants. Women who spent years protecting social reputations suddenly worried their names might appear in financial investigations by morning. Power always sounded loud until it became frightened. Then it sounded exactly like this. Veronica Hale hurried back toward Charles again, breathing harder now. "Sir, the attack originated through the merger authorization portal." Charles frowned. That system was internal only. Veronica swallowed carefully before speaking again. "It was manually overridden 36 minutes ago using executive credentials." Silence dropped sharply around the Beaumont family. Lucas looked up immediately. "What are you implying?" Veronica hesitated. "The authorization came from inside the Beaumont executive network." Charles slowly turned toward his son. Lucas shook his head instantly. "No, absolutely not. Your credentials initiated the access request," Veronica said quietly. "That is impossible." Lucas snapped louder this time. "Somebody cloned my authentication signature." Alana finally stepped toward the investor table, the soft heels of her shoes echoing gently across the marble floor. "No," she said calmly. "Somebody manipulated your impatience." Lucas stared at her. "What does that mean?" Alana reached for the abandoned tablet, still lying on the table beside scattered merger documents. Her fingers moved quickly across the screen while lines of encrypted activity flashed beneath her calm expression. "The attacker studied your company culture," she explained. "Aggressive expansion, fast approvals, minimal oversight whenever profit projections looked attractive." Charles's jaw tightened because he knew she was right. Beaumont Capital had spent years growing faster than regulators could monitor. Speed became pride. Pride became carelessness. "The hacker baited your executives with false efficiency upgrades," Alana continued. "And someone approved access without fully reviewing the embedded permissions." Lucas exhaled sharply. "We did what every company does." Alana looked directly at him. "Exactly." The room went quiet again. Somewhere near the ballroom entrance, reporters had begun gathering after rumors leaked beyond the hotel walls. Camera flashes occasionally burst through the glass doors like distant lightning. Evelyn Beaumont slowly approached Charles, her earlier confidence completely gone now. "Charles," she whispered carefully, "tell me this can be fixed." Charles did not answer her. His attention remained locked on Alana. The same woman his family publicly humiliated less than an hour earlier was now the only thing standing between Beaumont Capital and total collapse. Another alert flashed across the ballroom screens. International banking partners disconnecting. A low wave of panic swept through investors. One elderly board member sat down abruptly, as if his legs no longer trusted him. Lucas looked back at Alana again, this time without arrogance. "Dr. Reed," he said quietly, forcing the words out through pride that clearly hurt to swallow. "Please tell me there is still time." Investors stood shoulder to shoulder beneath the dim emergency lights, staring at the giant black screen as if fear itself had been projected across it. Outside the towering glass windows, rain slid down Manhattan in silver streaks, while camera flashes gathered near the hotel entrance below. News had already begun spreading. Beaumont Capital was bleeding in real time. Alana Reed remained near the investor table, silent for several long seconds, as lines of encrypted code continued racing across the tablet in her hands. The soft blue glow reflected across her face, while the ballroom watched her the way drowning passengers watch the only person who knows how to steer the ship. Charles Beaumont stepped closer carefully. "Dr. Reed," he said, his voice lower now, stripped of the authority that had filled it earlier that night. "Then you should have listened 6 months ago," Alana replied calmly without looking up from the screen. The tension between them sharpened instantly. Lucas opened his mouth to argue again, but stopped when another alert flashed across the ballroom display. Foreign assets locked. Several investors immediately reached for their phones at once. One man cursed under his breath when his banking application failed to load. Another executive turned pale after receiving a message from Singapore confirming suspended wire transfers. Panic spread quickly now, impossible to hide behind polished smiles anymore. Evelyn Beaumont stood near the ballroom wall gripping her champagne glass so tightly her knuckles had turned white. For the first time in years, people were not watching her with admiration. They were watching her with blame. She noticed it in the subtle movements. The way conversations stopped when she passed. The way socialites quietly stepped away from her table. Public power was fragile. It only looked permanent until humiliation entered the room. Veronica Hale moved beside Alana and lowered her voice. The breach is spreading into secondary holdings now. If federal regulators see this before containment, she did not finish the sentence. She did not need to. Everyone understood what came next. Investigations. Frozen assets. Criminal inquiries. Headlines by morning. Charles Beaumont slowly loosened the cuffs of his tuxedo shirt as though the expensive fabric suddenly felt too tight against his skin. "Tell me what you need," he said to Alana. She finally looked up at him directly. "Truth." Charles frowned slightly. "What?" "This attack is too precise," Alana said. "Whoever built it knew your internal authorization structure, your merger timing, and your investor routing schedule." Lucas folded his arms defensively again. "You are suggesting we have someone inside the company helping them?" "I am saying somebody opened the door before the hacker ever walked through it. Not fear of technology anymore. Fear of betrayal." The ballroom lights flickered again. This time the giant screen above the stage split suddenly into dozens of flashing windows filled with encrypted account data and investor names. Gasps echoed across the room. "Turn it off," one investor shouted. Technical staff rushed toward the control systems, but nothing responded. The ballroom had become a hostage to its own network. Alana's fingers moved quickly across the tablet. Her breathing remained controlled, but inside her chest memories had already begun returning again. Hospital hallways. Flickering fluorescent lights. Her mother crying quietly into folded hands while waiting for updates that never came fast enough. Mia lying unconscious behind emergency room doors while executives somewhere debated liability costs instead of fixing broken systems. Alana closed her eyes for half a second. Just half a second. Then she opened them again sharper than before. "I can stop the breach," she said quietly. The room went completely still. Hope entered the ballroom, so suddenly it almost hurt. Then Alana continued speaking. "Once I start, your entire executive network becomes visible to me." Charles Beaumont stared at her carefully. "Meaning?" Alana held his gaze without blinking. "Meaning if there is corruption buried inside Beaumont Capital, I will see all of it." Lucas's face tightened instantly. Evelyn looked toward her son sharply. And for the first time all night, Charles Beaumont looked less afraid of losing money than he was of what the truth might actually reveal. The ballroom had become almost completely silent except for the rain striking the tall glass windows and the faint electronic hum coming from the corrupted screens above the stage. Minutes remaining. The red countdown glowed across the dark ballroom like a warning heartbeat. Nobody touched their food anymore. Untouched filet mignon cooled beneath gold candlelight, while billionaires stood frozen beside half-empty champagne flutes, watching one woman decide whether their empire survived the night. Alana Reed remained still at the center of it all, her fingers resting lightly against the edge of the investor table, while encrypted data continued scrolling across the tablet screen in front of her. The soft glow reflected in her eyes, calm but distant, as though part of her had already stepped somewhere far beyond the ballroom. Charles Beaumont studied her carefully now, not with arrogance, not with social politeness, with something closer to shame. He looked at the faint redness still visible against her cheek beneath the crystal lights and slowly lowered his gaze. The memory of what his family had done less than an hour earlier hung over the room heavier than the financial collapse unfolding around them. Evelyn Beaumont stood near the ballroom wall, unusually quiet now. Her diamond earrings still caught the light beautifully, but the confidence they once framed had disappeared. She watched Alana with uncertainty instead of superiority for the first time all night. Lucas Beaumont broke the silence first. "If you access the executive network," he said cautiously, "how much will you see?" Alana did not look up immediately. "Everything connected to the merger servers." Lucas swallowed. "Internal accounts too?" "Yes. Another silence followed. Smaller this time. More personal. Veronica Hale noticed it instantly. Her eyes shifted briefly between Charles and Lucas before settling back on the darkened ballroom screens. Something inside Beaumont Capital was no longer just broken. It was hiding. Thunder rolled faintly outside over Manhattan. The ballroom lights dimmed again before stabilizing under emergency power. In the softened shadows, Alana suddenly looked exhausted. Not weak. Just tired in the way people become after carrying pain for too many years without letting anyone see its weight. She turned slightly toward the windows overlooking the city. Rainwater slid down the glass in silver ribbons while thousands of distant lights blurred together below, like stars dissolving into the streets. For a brief moment, the ballroom disappeared around her. She remembered another rainy night years ago outside St. Catherine Memorial Hospital. Her mother sitting silently on a hard plastic waiting room chair, wearing the same cleaning uniform she had worked 12 straight hours in because there had not been time to go home and change. Coffee growing cold beside her trembling hands. Doctors rushing through hallways illuminated by failing backup lights after the network collapse spread through the hospital systems. Alana remembered the sound of machines shutting down one by one behind emergency doors. She remembered praying for somebody important enough to care. But nobody came. Not fast enough. Dr. Reed, Charles's voice pulled her gently back into the ballroom. She blinked once and looked at him again. Older now. Smaller somehow beneath the pressure crushing his company. Why are you helping us? He asked quietly. The question caught even Lucas off guard. Alana looked down at the tablet screen where investor identities continued flashing through encrypted pathways. Because innocent people always suffer first when powerful people make reckless decisions, she said softly. Employees lose jobs. Families lose savings. Workers pay for mistakes they never made. Charles lowered his eyes. Every word landed exactly where it needed to. Across the ballroom, several investors exchanged uncomfortable glances. Men who spent decades treating layoffs like percentages suddenly forced to hear consequences spoken out loud. Alana inhaled slowly and straightened her posture again. The softness disappeared from her expression. Focus returned. I can isolate the breach, she said firmly. But once I begin, nobody touches the network. Nobody leaves the ballroom. And nobody lies to me again tonight. Her voice was not loud. It did not need to be. Authority settled naturally around her now, undeniable and steady. Charles Beaumont nodded first. Agreed. One by one, the others followed. Investors, attorneys, executives. Even Lucas finally gave a reluctant nod. The woman they humiliated was now leading the room. Alana placed the tablet flat against the marble table and began typing rapidly. Code reflected across her emerald gown beneath the dim chandelier light while the ballroom watched in complete silence. Then suddenly her fingers stopped. Her eyes narrowed sharply at something appearing on the screen. Very quietly, almost to herself, she whispered for words that drained the remaining color from Charles Beaumont's face. This attack came from inside. The sentence hung in the ballroom heavier than the storm outside. This attack came from inside. Nobody moved after Alana Reed said it. The red countdown clock continued glowing above the darkened stage. 6 minutes and 12 seconds remaining. Somewhere near the back of the room, ice shifted softly inside an abandoned glass. That tiny sound suddenly felt unbearably loud. Charles Beaumont stared at Alana as though the floor beneath him had begun cracking open. Inside, he repeated carefully. Alana's fingers moved again across the tablet screen, pulling layers of encrypted access logs into view. Columns of timestamps reflected across her calm face while the ballroom waited in complete silence. The breach was not random, she explained quietly. Whoever built it had executive-level access for weeks before tonight. Lucas Beaumont stepped forward immediately. That does not prove someone here caused it. Alana looked up at him. No. But it proves someone opened the door knowingly or carelessly. Veronica Hale slowly adjusted her glasses and moved closer to read the tablet. Her expression changed almost instantly. These permissions, she whispered. They were authorized under executive financial review clearance. Charles turned sharply toward his son. Lucas, I did not authorize a cyber attack. Lucas snapped back. His voice cracked slightly this time, frustration mixing with fear. I approved accelerated merger integration tools because we were behind schedule. Alana's eyes narrowed. Without a full audit? Lucas hesitated for half a second too long. That was enough. The room felt it. Investors exchanged dark looks. Attorneys stopped whispering and started listening carefully now. Charles Beaumont's face hardened slowly with disappointment rather than anger. You bypassed security review protocols. Lucas looked defensive immediately. Every major company fast-tracks integrations during acquisitions. Not without verification, Alana said firmly. You approved external architecture access through shell vendors tied to offshore routing systems. Lucas exhaled sharply. You are making it sound criminal. I am making it sound reckless. The ballroom fell silent again. Rain streaked harder across the towering windows overlooking Manhattan, while distant thunder rolled somewhere beyond the city skyline. Evelyn Beaumont finally stepped toward her son, her heels clicking softly against marble floors. Lucas, she said quietly, tell me you checked those vendors. He looked away from her. That was answer enough. Charles closed his eyes briefly, like a man suddenly realizing the collapse around him had not started tonight. It had started months ago with pride disguised as confidence. Another alert flashed across the giant ballroom screens. Federal fraud monitoring activated. Panic spread visibly now. One investor demanded his legal team prepare immediate withdrawal statements, while another began shouting into a phone near the ballroom exit. Staff members moved nervously beneath the chandeliers, carrying untouched trays no one noticed anymore. The glamour of the evening had completely dissolved. All that remained was exposure. Alana continued working rapidly, isolating pathways and blocking encrypted transfers one layer at a time. Sweat glistened faintly along her temple beneath the ballroom lights, but her hands never shook. She stayed composed with the same quiet discipline she learned years ago sitting beside her exhausted mother in empty office buildings after midnight. Stay calm. Keep working. Let panic belong to other people. Dr. Reed, Veronica said suddenly, her voice tight with disbelief. There is another issue. Alana glanced up. Veronica swallowed carefully before continuing. The attacker was not only stealing investor data. She turned the tablet slightly toward Charles. They were preparing to transfer liability records connected to Beaumont Medical Holdings. The moment those words appeared, something changed in Charles Beaumont's face. Real fear. Deep and personal. Alana noticed it instantly. What is Beaumont Medical Holdings? She asked quietly. Nobody answered right away. Lucas looked toward his father. Evelyn's posture stiffened again. Veronica lowered her eyes. And in that silence, Alana understood. Whatever Beaumont Medical Holdings was, it mattered more to them than the merger itself. Charles finally spoke, but his voice sounded older now. Smaller somehow beneath the pressure crushing the room. 7 years ago, he said slowly, our company acquired emergency infrastructure contracts connected to St. Catherine Memorial Hospital. Alana's fingers stopped moving. Completely. The ballroom disappeared around her for one sharp, unbearable second. St. Catherine, the hospital where Mia died. Cold fluorescent lights. Failing backup systems. Her mother crying quietly into folded hands. Alana lifted her eyes slowly toward Charles Beaumont, and for the first time all night, her calm expression cracked. Your company, she said softly. Own that hospital? Charles could not look away from her. Partially. The countdown clock continued blinking red above them. 5 minutes remaining. But suddenly the merger was no longer the most dangerous thing unraveling inside that ballroom. The ballroom suddenly felt colder than the storm outside. 4 minutes and 18 seconds remained on the red countdown clock above the stage, but nobody looked at it anymore. Every eye in the room had shifted toward Alana Reed. She stood motionless beside the investor table, staring at Charles Beaumont, as though the last 7 years of her life had just rearranged themselves in front of her. St. Catherine Memorial Hospital. The name echoed through her chest with unbearable clarity. The flickering lights, the exhausted nurses, the smell of antiseptic and rainwater drifting through emergency hallways during the blackout. Mia whispering weakly from the hospital bed that she was scared. Alana remembered promising her little sister everything would be okay, even while machines failed one by one around them. She remembered the silence afterward most of all. Heavy. Permanent. Charles Beaumont lowered his gaze slowly. The hospital collapse was supposed to remain confidential during the acquisition, he admitted quietly. Several investors exchanged stunned looks. Veronica Hale closed her eyes briefly like she already knew what came next. After the cyber attack, Charles continued. Our legal department feared liability exposure. Certain maintenance reports were sealed during restructuring. Lucas stared at his father in disbelief. You told the board the hospital failure was caused entirely by outside ransomware. Charles did not answer immediately. That silence became its own confession. Alana inhaled slowly through her nose, forcing air into lungs that suddenly felt too tight. Fingers trembled once against the edge of the marble table before she steadied them again. She refused to cry here. Not in this ballroom. Not in front of people who spent years treating pain like a negotiable expense. You buried the reports, she said softly. Charles looked up again, shame finally visible beneath the polished image he had worn his entire life. The infrastructure vulnerabilities existed before the attack, he admitted. Executives delayed upgrades because emergency modernization costs would have affected quarterly profits. Nobody in the ballroom moved. Even the investors stood silent now, stripped of all confidence by the weight of what they were hearing. Alana looked toward the giant windows overlooking Manhattan. Rain slid down the glass in silver streams, while city lights blurred beneath the storm. Somewhere far below, sirens echoed faintly through the streets. Life continuing normally while entire worlds collapsed upstairs behind crystal chandeliers. Mia was 19, Alana said quietly without turning around. She wanted to become a pediatric nurse. Her voice stayed calm, but the pain underneath it settled heavily across the room. She volunteered every Sunday at church because she thought lonely people should never feel invisible. Evelyn Beaumont lowered her eyes. The same woman who had slapped Alana less than an hour earlier now looked unable to even hold her gaze. She died waiting for systems your company refused to fix, Alana continued. And then your lawyers buried the truth to protect stock prices. Charles's shoulders seemed to sink beneath the words. For the first time all evening, he no longer looked like a billionaire. He looked like a man standing inside the ruins of his own decisions. The ballroom screens suddenly flashed again. Security breach escalation detected. The countdown clock dropped to 3 minutes and 6 seconds. Panic returned instantly. Investors grabbed phones again. Attorneys shouted across tables. Somewhere near the ballroom entrance, reporters pressed harder against security barriers as rumors continued leaking outside the hotel. Veronica stepped closer to Alana urgently. Dr. Reed, if we do not stop the breach now, every sealed medical liability file connected to St. Catherine becomes public in minutes. Alana closed her eyes briefly. She understood exactly what that meant. Families who lost loved ones would finally learn the truth. Lawsuits would explode across the country. Beaumont Capital would collapse beneath investigations by sunrise. Part of her wanted that. Part of her wanted every hidden document exposed to the world exactly as it deserved. But another part remembered the thousands of innocent employees connected to the company. Receptionists, custodians, nurses, clerks, workers who had never approved those decisions and would still suffer first when the empire fell apart. Charles Beaumont stepped toward her carefully. I cannot change what happened to your sister, he said quietly. But I am asking you to save the people who still can be protected. Alana finally turned back toward him. The faint mark on her cheek from earlier still lingered beneath the ballroom lights. But now nobody in that room saw weakness when they looked at her. They saw the only person still standing with integrity intact. She stared at Charles for several long seconds before speaking. When this is over, she said softly, you will release every sealed report connected to St. Catherine. Charles nodded immediately. Yes. Every family deserves the truth. They will have it. 2 minutes and 21 seconds became 1 minute and 48 almost instantly. Time inside the ballroom no longer felt real. The red countdown clock above the stage pulsed against the darkened screens, while 400 wealthy strangers stood trapped between fear and silence beneath the crystal chandeliers of the Beaumont Grand Hotel. Nobody spoke loudly anymore. Panic had burned itself out and left something heavier behind. Consequence. Alana Reed sat at the center of the investor table with the tablet glowing beneath her hands, her emerald gown reflecting flickers of encrypted code, while rain continued sliding down the towering windows overlooking Manhattan. Her fingers moved steadily now. Calm. Precise. Every command she entered sealed another breach pathway across the Beaumont network. The ballroom watched in complete silence except for the quiet tapping of her nails against the glass screen and the low electronic hum of servers fighting to survive. Charles Beaumont stood a few feet away, motionless. He had spent his entire life believing power came from control, from wealth, from making rooms bend around his presence. Yet tonight none of his money could stop the collapse unfolding around him. Only the woman his family publicly humiliated had the ability to save what remained. Firewall rerouting complete. Veronica Hale whispered suddenly, staring at her monitor with disbelief. She is cutting them off. Investors slowly lifted their eyes toward the giant ballroom display, where flashing alerts began disappearing one by one. Offshore transfer blocked. Secondary access denied. Encryption channel closed. A faint wave of hope moved through the room for the first time all night. Lucas Beaumont stepped closer to the screen, his face pale beneath the emergency lighting. How are you doing this so fast? Alana never looked up. Because I already built protection systems for attacks exactly like yours. Yours. Not theirs. Yours. The distinction hit harder than Lucas expected. He lowered his eyes immediately. The countdown clock dropped below 1 minute. Outside the hotel entrance, flashing cameras illuminated the rain as reporters crowded behind security barriers waiting for answers. Inside the ballroom, nobody cared about appearances anymore. Tuxedos wrinkled. Makeup faded beneath stress. Expensive reputations trembled quietly behind lowered eyes. Another line suddenly appeared across the giant screen overhead. Data breach contained. A collective breath escaped the ballroom all at once. Several investors nearly collapsed back into chairs from relief, while staff members exchanged stunned looks near the ballroom walls. Veronica stared down at her monitor, shaking her head slowly in disbelief. She stopped it, she whispered. My God, she actually stopped it. Silence followed. Not fearful silence this time. Something softer, heavier, human. Alana finally lowered her hands from the tablet. Her shoulders sagged slightly beneath the ballroom lights as exhaustion caught up with her all at once. 7 years of grief, anger, discipline. Tonight had pulled all of it back into the open. Charles Beaumont stepped toward her carefully. The entire ballroom watched him. He stopped directly in front of Alana Reed, the woman his family once dismissed as beneath them. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then slowly, in front of every investor, executive, reporter, and socialite in the room, Charles Beaumont lowered his head. Dr. Reed, he said quietly, his voice rough with something painfully close to regret. I owe you more than an apology. The room remained perfectly still. Evelyn Beaumont looked down at the floor, unable to meet Alana's eyes anymore. Lucas stood silent beside his father, stripped completely of the arrogance he carried earlier that night. Alana rose slowly from her chair. The faint mark on her cheek still remained beneath the chandelier light. But now it looked less like humiliation and more like evidence of everything she survived without losing herself. She looked directly at Charles. Do not apologize because you need saving, she said softly. Apologize because people suffered while your company protected profit instead of truth. Charles nodded once. No defense. No excuse. Just acceptance. Alana picked up her silver clutch from the table and turned toward the ballroom windows where dawn had just begun bleeding softly into the Manhattan skyline beyond the rain clouds. Storm outside was finally beginning to weaken. Behind her, investors quietly discussed federal investigations already coming by morning. The $1 billion merger was over. Beaumont Capital would survive the cyber attack, but not the secrets buried beneath it. Alana paused near the ballroom exit as the first pale sunlight reflected across the marble floor. For years, powerful people looked through her like she was invisible until they needed something only she could give them. But tonight was different. Tonight the room finally saw her clearly. Not as the black woman they underestimated. Not as the outsider they humiliated. But as the strongest person in the building. And as Alana stepped into the quiet Manhattan morning, while camera flashes reflected softly against the rain-soaked streets, nobody dared look away from her again.